Hi, everybody, and welcome to week 6 of EDC 420. I'm so excited for this week. It's one of my favorite weeks in this course because we're going to talk about the multilingual turn in second language acquisition. So last week, we spent some time thinking about the social turn and where the field started to move at the turn of the 21st century as we began to center context and students' identities and their identity negotiation in the ways that we were thinking about second language acquisition. In the last 10 years, we've moved towards a multilingual framing of SLA and begun to think a little bit more about the monolingual lenses that we've been using in the field, and also deconstructing the idea of language itself as we move toward interrogating the ideologies that have driven the field of second language acquisition. So I'm excited for you to dive into the content this week. We're going to start with a pretty accessible chapter from Freeman and Freeman, where they talk about how views of bilinguals have changed. And then they also get into some models that have been used to teach them, but you don't have to read that part. But they're going to talk about the ways in which our thinking around bilinguals and bilingualism has shifted in recent years. So I've identified a few terms to think about and know as you're engaging with that chapter. Then we move towards translanguaging. So that's one of the main topics we're going to think about for this week. What is translanguaging, and how do we think about it as a pedagogy, and how does translanguaging theory help us to better understand what second language acquisition is, and who second language learners or bilingual learners are. So to support us in our learning around translanguaging, I've got a couple of videos for you to watch from Dr. Jose Medina and Dr. Mike Mena, where they kind of unpack this term for us. And then you're going to read an article from Jasona Sinoz and Dirk Gorder, where they'll talk about thinking about teaching English through the lens of pedagogical translanguaging. So that'll give you a chance to tease out a little bit more of what translanguaging means and is as we think about it in relation to pedagogy. And I have a lecture video I've created where I also unpack translanguaging a little bit more to help you kind of wrap your mind around what it is and how it's useful for our thinking about SLA. With that, we have an application activity. So I gave you a couple examples that I've pulled showcasing translanguaging, or the flexible use of language, the dynamic use of drawing upon a full linguistic repertoire to make meaning. So I show a poem and I have an image, and then I've created a Padlet where I've dropped a few more examples, and I would love for all of you to also do the same. Find an example of translanguaging in the wild. It can be in a song, in a poem, in a text. It could be also a sign that you see, like I shared. It could be a meme. So any example of translanguaging, and add it to the Padlet with your name and briefly describe, what it is and why you think translanguaging was used there. So this will be a way for us to kind of document the way that we're finding translanguaging in the world. From there, we're going to move to thinking about racial-linguistic ideologies, which is another idea that is really pushing our field forward and helping us to think a little bit more directly about the intersection of race and language and how together those are shaping experiences for minoritized language speakers as they learn a new language. And so there's a lot of questions around power and around historicizing our understandings of how particular languages became standardized through the lens of race and language. So for this work, you're going to be, or to engage with this concept, you're going to be watching another video that breaks it down with Mike Mena, and he'll pull out some key terms that have been introduced by scholars who study racial linguistic ideologies. And then we'll be reading an article from one of those scholars, Nelson Flores, in which he applies these understandings to deconstruct and critique the notion of academic language. And I chose this article in particular because, in the field of SLA, but also more broadly in education, we often talk about academic language as a thing, right? And so I think it's a helpful reminder that even academic language is a construct. And so he pushes back against that through the lens of racial linguistic ideologies, and proposes a different way that we might think about the languaging that happens at schools and the language that students bring with them into our classrooms. And as a treat, I also included a 2-minute clip from an episode of the new reboot of Saved by the Bell that I think does a really good job of showcasing racial linguistic ideologies in action. So take a look at that and think about how you can apply some of the concepts that we learned about this week in that video clip. So that is all of our content learning. There's a lot, but I hope you find it interesting and thought-provoking, that it pushes your thinking a little bit in some of the ways that you've conceptualized language and language acquisition. So I've left the discussion questions more open-ended this week, allowing you to just talk about your takeaways, and also think about how some of the concepts we're learning now compare to some of the concepts we've learned thus far, things that are similar or different from some of the newer SLA literature and concepts and some of the older, more foundational theories. And then as a reminder, please make sure you conduct your interview with your focal learner so you can keep yourself on pace for your analysis paper for the first part of your case study. If you have any questions about that assignment, or you want to set up a time to meet to talk through it, please don't hesitate to send me an email, and I'm happy to help you think through that process. So I hope you have a wonderful week, and I look forward to engaging with you on the discussion board.